In the unforgiving dust of the Arizona Territory, a woman's heart became a battleground. Lorena Bishop promised to a man who ruled his town with an iron fist was bound by a debt of honor she did not incur. Sheriff Gideon Cole demanded her hand as payment, a trophy to polish his brutal authority. But her soul already belonged to another, an Apache warrior, heir to a proud and hunted people. This isn't a simple story of love and loss. It's the story of a reckoning where a forced vow would ignite a fire that threatened to consume them all, proving that in a lawless land, the most dangerous thing you can own is a heart that refuses to be broken. The sun was a merciless hammer over the canyons of the Arizona Territory in the summer of 1878. For Lorena Bishop, however, the blistering heat was a familiar embrace. It was the price of freedom, the cost of escaping the suffocating confines of her father's failing ranch, and the worried lines etched permanently around his eyes. Her horse, a sturdy buckskin named Dust Devil, picked its way through a maze of red rock and ocotillo, its path sure-footed and certain. Lorena knew this path by heart. It led to the one place she felt truly alive. She dismounted near a hidden spring, a sliver of impossible green, tucked into a deep fold of the earth. The air here was cooler, filled with the scent of damp soil and sweet desert blossoms. She didn't have to wait long. He emerged from the shadows of the cottonwood trees, not with a sound, but as if the shadows themselves had simply coalesced into the shape of a man. Kyle was his name in her world. To his own people, the Chiricahua Apache, he was Taza, the son of the great chief Goshise. He was tall and lean with the fluid grace of a predator. His face, framed by straight jet-black hair, was a study in harsh beauty, but his eyes, dark and intelligent, held a softness reserved only for her. "You came," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to settle the very dust around them. "Did you doubt I would?" Lorena smiled, her heart giving a familiar, powerful leap. She walked towards him, her worn riding skirt whispering against the dry brush. He took her hands, his touch warm and calloused. "I always doubt. My world is doubt. Your world is fences and promises written on paper. My world is shrinking, Cahill," she confessed, the smile fading from her face. "The drought has taken nearly everything. My father, he sits on the porch from sunup to sundown, just watching the dust blow. He looks like a ghost haunting his own life." Kyle's expression hardened. He understood the language of loss, of watching a way of life parch and wither under an unrelenting sun. For his people, it was not just the sky that was hostile, but the tide of settlers, miners, and soldiers that swept across their ancestral lands. "The Bishop Ranch has good water," Kyle noted, his gaze distant. "The deep well never runs dry. That is a powerful medicine in this land." "It's also a curse," Lorena said bitterly. "It's the only thing of value we have left, and men of value want it." They spoke for what felt like minutes, but was likely hours, their conversation, a fragile bridge between two worlds that were destined to collide. He told her of the growing tensions of the white prospectors who ignored the treaty lines, scarring the sacred mountains in their hunt for silver. She told him of her small joys of the books she read, and her dreams of one day seeing the ocean, a body of water so vast it was impossible to imagine. With him, she wasn't just Franklin Bishop's daughter, a burden and a responsibility. She was just Lorena. As the sun began to dip, painting the canyon walls in hues of fire and blood, Kyle grew serious. He reached into a leather pouch at his side and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden bird. "My father made this for my mother when he first courted her," he said, pressing it into her palm. "It is a sign of intent. It says, My heart has chosen its home. Lorena's breath caught in her throat. The wood was smooth and warm against her skin. It was more precious than any jewel, more binding than any written contract. It was a promise. Kaolai, you do not have to answer now, he said gently. But know what it means. Know that I see a life with you, Lorena. A difficult life, a hidden life, perhaps, but a life. She clutched the bird tightly, tears welling in her eyes. Yes, she whispered. My heart has chosen its home, too. The ride back to the ranch was filled with a dangerous, soaring hope. But as she crested the final rise and saw the homestead below, a cold dread extinguished the warmth in her chest. A sleek black buggy was hitched near the porch. It was an omen, as stark and unwelcome as a vulture circling overhead. It belonged to one man, Sheriff Gideon Cole of the nearby town of Redemption. She found him in the parlor with her father, Franklin. The room felt cramped, airless. Sheriff Cole dominated it completely. He was a man built of hard lines and sharp angles, from his immaculately tailored black coat to his clean-shaven jaw. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, missed nothing. He held a glass of whiskey, but he didn't drink from it. He merely used it as a prop, a symbol of his casual power. Lorena. Her father said, his voice thin and strained. He couldn't meet her eyes. The sheriff has an offer for us, for you. Sheriff Cole rose slowly, his movements deliberate and unnervingly smooth. Miss Bishop, your father finds himself in a precarious financial position. The bank in Tucson holds the note on this ranch, and I, as it happens, have recently acquired that note. Lorena's blood ran cold. You bought our debt. An investment. Cole corrected her, his lips curving into a smile that held no warmth. I am a man who believes in the future of this territory, and I believe in strong foundations. This ranch, this town, they need stability. They need leadership. He took a step closer, his gaze sweeping over her possessive and appraising. A partnership, you might say. What kind of partnership? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The most binding kind. Cole said, his eyes locking onto hers. Your father's debt is considerable. The drought offers no relief. Foreclosure is inevitable. However, I am prepared to forgive the entire sum, to tear up the note. In exchange for what? Franklin Bishop finally croaked, looking pleadingly at his daughter. Sheriff Cole placed his whiskey glass down on the mantel with a decisive click. In exchange for your daughter's hand in marriage, you will marry me, Miss Bishop. You will become Mrs. Cole, the First Lady of Redemption. In doing so, you will save your father's home and legacy. It's a simple, elegant solution to a very messy problem. The room tilted. The carved bird in her pocket felt like a shard of ice against her skin. It was not an offer. It was a sentence. She looked from the sheriff's cold, triumphant face to her father's broken, defeated one. He was trapping her using her father's love for her and this land as the jaws of the cage, and she was walking right into it. Redemption was a town that lived in fear of its name. There was no redemption here, only the stark, unbending law of Sheriff Gideon Cole. The town was his personal fiefdom, carved out of the dust and governed by the barrel of his Colt. From the moment Lorena arrived in the back of Cole's buggy, she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, some curious, some pitying, but most of them carefully blank, lest they betray an opinion that might draw the sheriff's attention. The sheriff's house stood at the end of the main street, a two-story timber frame structure that was as imposing and out of place as its owner. It was a monument to order and control in a land defined by chaos. Inside it was furnished with heavy dark wood and polished silver. There were no personal touches, No signs of a life lived only of wealth displayed. It was a museum, and she was to be the prize exhibit. "This will be your home," Cole announced, gesturing vaguely around the immaculate parlor. "Mrs. Peters comes in to cook and clean. You will want for nothing, except my freedom." Lorena said, her voice quiet but firm. Cole turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Freedom is an illusion, Lorena. There are only choices and consequences. You made a sensible choice to save your father. That is a kind of freedom, is it not? The freedom from ruin." He stepped closer, tracing a finger along her jawline. His touch was cold, clinical. "You are an intelligent woman. You will learn the rules of this house. You will learn your role as my wife. You will be respected, admired, and in return you will be loyal. Loyalty is something I value above all else." The days leading up to the wedding were a special kind of hell. Cole paraded her through town, his hand always firmly on the small of her back, a gesture of both possession and warning. He introduced her to the town's key figures, the banker, Mr. Abernathy, a man whose face was a permanent mask of nervous sweat, and the saloon owner, a formidable woman named Martha O'Malley, whose sharp eyes seemed to see right through the facade. It was during one of these public displays that Lorena witnessed the true nature of the man she was forced to marry. A young ranch hand, no older than 18, was accused of stealing a horse. He was dragged into the street by Cole's deputy, a lanky, quiet man named Wade Garrett. The boy swore his innocence, his voice cracking with terror. Cole didn't convene a trial. He was the judge and jury. He listened to the accuser for a moment, then turned to the boy. "In redemption, we do not tolerate thieves. They are a cancer that weakens the herd." "I ain't no thief, Sheriff, I swear it," the boy cried. Cole drew his pistol with a liquid speed that was terrifying. He didn't point it at the boy's head or heart. He aimed lower. The shot echoed off the false front buildings, and the boy screamed, collapsing to the ground, clutching his shattered kneecap. "He won't be riding any horse for a long time," Cole said to the stunned silence of the crowd. "Let that be a lesson." He turned to Lorena, his eyes searching her face. "Order requires a firm hand. Do you understand?" Lorena felt sick. She could only nod her mind, screaming. This wasn't justice. It was brutal theater designed to reinforce his absolute power. Deputy Garrett, his face pale, refused to meet her gaze as he hauled the whimpering boy away. That night, Lorena lay awake in the guest room Cole had assigned her, the carved bird clutched in her hand. She felt a despair so profound it was like drowning. Kyle seemed like a dream from another life. How could she ever reach him? How could she escape this gilded cage when its bars were the sheriff's omnipresent control and its lock was her father's very survival? She tried to find a weakness in Cole's armor. She engaged him in conversation at dinner, feigning interest in the town's business. He was meticulous, intelligent, and utterly guarded. He spoke of progress, of bringing the railroad through, of making redemption a pillar of civilization. But beneath the polished words, she sensed a deep, rapacious hunger. He didn't want to build a community. He wanted to own it. Her only flicker of hope came from an unexpected source. While being fitted for a wedding dress, an opulent creation of lace and silk that felt like a burial shroud, she spoke with Martha O'Malley, whose saloon doubled as a boarding house and general gathering place. "You've got a heavy spirit for a bride-to-be." Martha said, her tone low as she adjusted a pin. "I have a lot on my mind," Lorena replied evasively. Martha's eyes met hers in the mirror. "This town has a way of putting things on a person's mind. The sheriff, he's particular. Likes his things just so. His town, his laws, his wife." The emphasis was subtle, but clear. "He's a powerful man," Lorena said, testing the waters. "Power's a funny thing," Martha mused, her hands still busy with the dress. "It can make a man feel like a king. It can also make him blind. He thinks he sees everything, but mostly he just sees what he wants to see." It was a small crack of light in a suffocating darkness. Martha O'Malley was not intimidated by Gideon Cole, and she saw Lorena not as the sheriff's prize, but as a woman in a trap. Days later, her opportunity came. Cole announced he would be riding out with Deputy Garrett to investigate rumors of Apache raids near the mining camps in the Dragoon Mountains, the very direction of Cale's people. He would be gone for at least 2 days. "You will remain in the house," he instructed her, his gaze like a physical restraint. "Mrs. Peters will be here during the day. Lock the doors at night." "Of course, Gideon," she replied, forcing a tone of meek compliance that she was beginning to perfect. The moment his buggy disappeared in a cloud of dust, a frantic, desperate plan began to form in Lorena's mind. It was reckless. It was foolish. If she were caught, the consequences would be terrifying. But the thought of Kyle, of the promise in the carved bird, was a fire in her blood. She would rather face Cole's wrath than let that fire die out. She had to try. She had to ride. The risk was monumental. If Cole had left someone to watch her, or if Deputy Garrett doubled back, for any reason she would be caught. But the silence of the house was a roaring invitation. Lorena waited until the sun was high, a time when the streets of Redemption were sleepy and slow. She told Mrs. Peters she had a headache and was going to lie down. Then she slipped out the back, dressed not in the fine clothes Cole had bought her, but in her own sturdy riding skirt and boots. Her horse Dust Devil was boarded at the town livery. Saddling him felt like an act of rebellion. Every cinch she pulled tight, every creak of the leather was a small victory against her gilded cage. She rode out of town, slowly heading west, as if on a casual afternoon ride. Only when the last buildings of Redemption were a hazy memory in the shimmering heat did she urge Dust Devil into a gallop, turning him south towards the familiar red rock canyons. The air itself seemed to change as she rode. The oppressive, watchful atmosphere of the town gave way to the vast, indifferent silence of the desert. Here she wasn't the sheriff's fiancée. She was just a woman on a horse, a speck in an immense, beautiful wilderness. Her heart pounded with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. She reached the hidden spring as dusk began to bleed across the sky. The place was empty. A cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach. Had he given up on her? Had news of her engagement reached him? She dismounted her body, aching from the hard ride, and weighted her eyes, scanning the darkening shadows. He appeared so suddenly she gasped. One moment there was nothing. The next, Kyle was standing by the spring, his face a mask of grim fury. "They say you are to marry the man they call sheriff," he said, his voice flat and hard. "The Iron Sheriff, the one who pays bounties for Apache scalps." Lorena flinched as if struck. "Cale, I had no choice. He holds my father's life in his hands. He bought the debt on our ranch." "There is always a choice," he countered, stepping closer. The softness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, hurting anger. "You chose your father's land over the promise we made." "No!" she cried, rushing forward, her hands finding his arms. "I chose my father's life." "You don't know this man, Cale. He would see my father ruined, left to die in the dust, and he would do it with a smile. This isn't a life I've chosen. It's a prison. I came here today because I would rather die than live it without you knowing the truth." Her desperation, her raw anguish, finally broke through his anger. He looked down at her tear-streaked face, and the hardness in his expression fractured. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She buried her face in his shoulder, the clean, earthy scent of him, a balm to her frayed soul. "Forgive me," he murmured into her hair. "My fear spoke with a forked tongue, the thought of you with him. It is a fire in my blood." "He leaves for the dragoons tomorrow," she whispered urgently, pulling back to look at him. "He and his deputy. They are investigating raids on the silver mines." Kyle's eyes narrowed. "There have been no raids by my people. Gochis has forbidden it. We are trying to keep the peace, to keep the soldiers from the reservation." He grew still, a sudden cold understanding dawning on his face. "The silver mines. They are on the edge of the Broken Spear Canyon. Our people consider that ground sacred. The prospectors who dig there are a plague. But we haven't raided them." "Then who did?" Lorena asked. "Perhaps no one," Kyle said slowly, his mind clearly working. "Or perhaps someone who wants it to look like my people did. Someone who wants an excuse to bring in more guns to drive us out." He looked at her, and she saw the terrifying connection in his eyes. "This sheriff, does he profit from these mines?" "I don't know," Lorena admitted. "He talks about progress, about making the town wealthy. He has dealings with the banker Abernathy and men from Tucson. The land the mines are on. It was once part of the treaty lands." Kyle said, his voice low and dangerous. "The treaty was changed with a new map drawn in a government office 1,000 miles away. A map drawn by liars. This Sheriff Cole, he is not just a lawman. He is a thief in a suit." A plan began to form between them, born of desperation and a shared enemy. It was no longer just about their love. It was about survival, his people's and hers. "I can't run," Lorena said, the words tasting like ash. "If I disappear, he will destroy my father. But I can be your eyes and ears inside his house. I can listen. I can learn." "It is a dangerous game," Kyle warned, his hands framing her face. "He will kill you if he discovers it. He is already killing me slowly." She countered, her gaze fierce. "I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees. Tell me what to look for. Maps, letters, names?" "Look for the name Coronado Ventures," Kyle told her. "It is the name on the miners' claim markers. Find out who owns it. Find out what Cole's connection is. The truth of that connection is a weapon we can use." Their time was running out. The moon was rising, casting the canyon in an ethereal silver light. Their parting was urgent and passionate, a desperate affirmation of their bond in a world that was trying to tear them apart. He pressed the carved bird back into her hand. "Keep this," he said. "When you feel the cage around you, remember the sky is still there." The ride back to redemption was even more fraught than the ride out. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like an approaching rider. She slipped back into the sheriff's house like a ghost, her heart a wild drum against her ribs. She was just in time. An hour later, she heard the sound of horses. Peeking through the parlor curtains, she saw Cole and Deputy Garrett riding back into town. They were a day early. A chilling realization washed over her. The trip wasn't about investigating raids. It was a test for her. He had been watching her all along. Gideon Cole entered the house and found Lorena in the parlor, calmly reading a book under the lamplight. She had washed the dust from her face, and hands brushed her hair and changed into a simple house dress. Her heart was a frantic bird beating against her ribs, but she forced her expression to remain serene, her hands steady on the pages. "You're back early," she said, looking up with a placid smile she did not feel. "The trail went cold," Cole replied, his eyes sweeping the room, then settling on her. He was studying her, searching for any flicker of guilt, any sign of deceit. It seems the Apache are more elusive than advertised, or perhaps the rumors were exaggerated. He walked over to the sideboard and poured himself a whiskey. "Did you have a pleasant day?" "It was very quiet," she said, her voice a marvel of control. "I confess I find redemption a little dull when you are not here." A flicker of something, vanity perhaps, or satisfaction crossed his face. "You will get used to it. Or rather, it will get used to you." He took a slow sip of his drink, his gaze never leaving her. "I trust you followed my instructions and remained within the house." "Of course, Gideon. Where else would I go?" The lie felt slick and venomous on her tongue. He smiled, a thin, knowing curve of his lips that sent a shiver down her spine. Nowhere. Exactly. He knew. She wasn't sure how, but she was certain he knew she had left. He wasn't accusing her because he didn't need to. He was a cat playing with a mouse, enjoying the game, asserting his dominance through implication and suspense. His early return wasn't a coincidence. It was a calculated move. He had likely ridden just out of sight of the town, waited and watched. Her casual afternoon ride had been noted, her direction logged. He was showing her that even her pretense of freedom was an illusion he allowed. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological torment. Cole was impeccably courteous, even attentive. He brought her a gift, a pair of delicate silver earrings from the town's general store. As he fastened them for her, his fingers cool against her skin, he whispered, "Silver. The metal that is building our future. It runs in veins deep in the earth, a reward for those bold enough to take it." The mention of silver was no accident. It was a deliberate probe, another turn of the screw. She thought of what Cale had said about the mines on sacred land, about Coronado Ventures. The wedding was moved up. "No sense in a long engagement," Cole announced one evening. "The circuit judge will be passing through next week. We will be married on Saturday." Lorena felt the walls closing in the air, growing thinner. She had to find what Kyle had asked for. Her search had to be careful, almost subliminal. She couldn't risk ransacking his office. Instead, she used her role as the lady of the house. While dusting his desk, a task she insisted on performing herself, much to Mrs. Peters's surprise, her eyes scanned every stray paper, every ledger. Cole's office was a reflection of the man himself, obsessively neat, organized, and devoid of personal sentiment. His ledgers were filled with meticulous records of fines, taxes, and town expenses. But in a locked drawer to which he carried the only key, she sensed his secrets were kept. Her chance came unexpectedly. Deputy Wade Garrett arrived at the house, his face grim. There had been a flash flood in a canyon to the north. A family of homesteaders was missing. Cole was needed immediately. It was an emergency, an act of God that even the sheriff couldn't have planned. He grabbed his coat and gun belt, issuing clipped orders to the deputy. For the first time, he was distracted, his focus entirely on the crisis at hand. In his haste, he left the small, ornate key ring on his desk. Lorena's heart stopped. She waited, listening, until the sound of their horses faded completely. Then she moved. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the drawer. Inside it was not the chaotic mess of a criminal's life, but a series of neatly filed folders. One was labeled Bishop Ranch, Survey. Her breath hitched. She opened it. Inside was not just a standard land survey, but a geological map intricately detailed. A thick vein of silver marked in red ink ran directly beneath the land where her father's well was located, the well that never ran dry. Cole hadn't just wanted the ranch for its water or its land. He wanted it for the river of silver that lay sleeping beneath it. He hadn't saved her father from the bank. He had been the predator circling all along, using the bank to secure his prize. Her father's debt was merely the tool he used to acquire the mineral rights without suspicion. In another folder labeled CV Holdings, she found it. Coronado Ventures. It was a partnership agreement. On it were 3 names. The first was the banker Mr. Abernathy. The second was a powerful cattle baron from Tucson named Pierce. And the third, listed simply as a silent partner entitled to 50% of all profits, was Gideon Cole. He wasn't just a thief. He was the king of thieves. He was using his badge to protect his own secret mining operation, an operation built on stolen Apache land and a fraudulent claim. The raids he was investigating were likely fictions. He created himself excuses to keep the army present, and the Apache under suspicion, preventing them from reclaiming the land he was plundering. She carefully put the files back, locked the drawer, and placed the key ring exactly where he had left it. She had the truth. But the truth was a dangerous weapon. Wielded incorrectly, it would destroy her and everyone she cared about. As she stood in the silence of his office, she knew the wedding on Saturday was no longer just a sentence of a miserable life. It was a potential death sentence. She was about to marry the man who was actively orchestrating the destruction of Cale's people, and she was carrying the secret that could get them all killed. The day of the wedding dawned grey and oppressive, the sky a blanket of unwept tears. Lorena stood before the mirror in the silk and lace dress, but she saw a stranger staring back. The woman in the glass had haunted eyes and a grim set to her jaw. Martha O'Malley stood behind her, adjusting the veil. Like a lamb to the slaughter, Martha muttered, her voice low and rough with sympathy. "Chin up, girl. Even lambs have teeth." Lorena met her gaze in the mirror. "This lamb is learning how to be a wolf," she whispered. The ceremony was a brief, sterile affair held in the parlor of the sheriff's house. The circuit judge, a portly man with watery eyes, seemed eager to finish the business and move on. Her father Franklin stood beside her, looking frail and old, his eyes filled with a wretched mix of gratitude and guilt. Gideon Cole stood tall and proud, a conquering king, claiming his queen. The entire town leadership was there: Abernathy, the banker, Pierce, the cattle baron, their faces smug and triumphant. They were not just witnessing a wedding, they were celebrating the consolidation of their power. When the judge pronounced them man and wife, Cole's kiss was not passionate. It was an act of branding, hard and possessive. The polite applause in the room sounded like dirt falling on a coffin. The celebration that followed was a grotesque parody of joy. Whiskey flowed, and the men toasted the happy couple, their voices loud and their laughter hollow. Lorena moved through it all like a ghost. A polite smile fixed on her face, her mind a cold, calculating machine. She was now Mrs. Gideon Cole. She had a new name, a new position, and with that position came access. She was no longer an outsider. She was on the inside of the conspiracy. The guests departed as evening fell, leaving a lingering scent of cigar smoke and spilled liquor. Mrs. Peters cleared the last of the glasses and left with a sympathetic glance. Franklin. His duty done, hugged his daughter with a trembling desperation before escaping back to the ranch he had so dearly bought. Then they were alone. "My wife." Cole said the words rolling off his tongue with deep satisfaction. He walked towards her, unbuttoning his waistcoat. Lorena instinctively braced herself, her body tensing for an assault. But he didn't touch her. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes raking over her. "Take off the dress." It was an order, cold and simple. Her fingers fumbled with the tiny buttons on the back. It felt like she was shedding a skin. The opulent gown pooled at her feet, leaving her standing in her simple chemise. "You are beautiful," he stated, as if observing a piece of art he had just purchased. "But your beauty is not what I married you for. I married you for your name. The Bishop name has been in this valley for 40 years. It has a legitimacy that my money cannot buy. Through you I become part of this land, not just a man who enforces its laws." He began to talk, his voice a low, confident monologue. He paced the room, outlining his vision, his ambition. He spoke of the railroad, of a smelter, for the silver, of turning redemption into the new capital of the territory. He was revealing the full scope of his plan, not to a partner, but to a possession, as if speaking his thoughts aloud, to feel their weight and grandeur. "The silver from the Coronado claim is just the beginning," he said, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light. "The vein on your father's land is 10 times richer. Once we are settled, I will make your father an offer to buy him out. A generous offer. He will take it, and the Bishop Ranch will belong to me. To us." He was laying all his cards on the table, confident that she was powerless to act against him. To him, she was a beautiful, intelligent part of the acquisition. Her compliance was assumed. "You are my wife now, Lorena," he said, finally stopping in front of her. "Your loyalties are with me. Your future is with me. Do not forget that." He reached out and cupped her chin, forcing her to look at him. "There will be no more afternoon rides. There will be no more secrets. You belong to me in this house, in this town, in every way. Do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. She felt a chilling, terrifying clarity. He was not a man who could be escaped. He was a man who had to be dismantled piece by piece from the inside out. He led her not to the master bedroom, but to her own room, the one she had been using since her arrival. "This marriage is a business arrangement for now," he said, his hand on the doorknob. "A partnership. We will have a proper union when I am satisfied of your absolute loyalty. Good night, Mrs. Cole." He closed the door, and she heard the faint click of a key turning in the lock from the outside. She was a prisoner. The wedding had not freed her father. It had simply transferred the ownership of the cage to her. She sank onto the bed, the cold dread replaced by a slow burning rage. He had underestimated her. He saw her as a beautiful doll, a symbol. He didn't see the woman who had met an Apache warrior in a secret canyon. He didn't see the woman who had held the proof of his crimes in her hands. He thought he had locked her in, but he had just given her the time and the motive to plan his destruction. Locked in her room each night, Lorena Cole became a strategist. The rage that had filled her on her wedding night cooled into a sharp, patient resolve. Gideon saw her as an ornament, and she would play the part perfectly. By day she was the dutiful wife, managing the household, arranging flowers, and accompanying him to church on Sunday, a picture of grace and compliance. Her meekness pleased him, feeding his ego and lulling his suspicion. He had won, and he saw no reason to look for threats from a conquered territory. But beneath the placid surface, Lorena was weaving a web. Her first thread was Martha O'Malley. Lorena began making daily trips to the general store, which was conveniently located next to Martha's saloon. She would stop in for a sarsaparilla, engaging Martha in seemingly idle gossip. "The sheriff is so busy," Lorena would sigh, fanning herself in the heat. "He has meetings at all hours with Mr. Abernathy and that cattleman, Mr. Pierce. I worry he's working too hard." Martha, a shrewd reader of people, understood the game. "Men like that don't work, dear. They plot. There's a difference." Lorena passed on everything she gleaned. Names from letters left on Gideon's desk. Snippets of conversation overheard through his office door. She told Martha about Coronado Ventures, about the geological map, about the way Cole Abernathy and Pierce were a triumvirate ruling the town's finances. Martha, in turn, was Lorena's connection to the world outside the sheriff's house. The miners at the Coronado claim are getting paid in company scrip, not cash, Martha reported one afternoon, her voice low. They can only spend it at the company store where prices are double. They're little more than slaves. And there's talk. The ore they're pulling is richer than anyone thought, but the men see none of it. The second thread of Lorena's web was Deputy Wade Garrett. He was a more difficult and dangerous target. Garrett was a quiet, haunted man, loyal to Cole, out of fear or some long-forgotten debt. But Lorena had seen the look on his face when Cole had shot the young ranch hand. She saw a conscience buried under years of pragmatism. She started with kindness. She would offer him a cool glass of water when he came to the house to report to Cole. She'd ask after his wife, who lived on a small homestead outside of town. She learned his wife was ill and that the doctor's bills were piling up. One day, as Garrett was leaving, she stopped him on the porch. "Deputy," she said softly, "I know the sheriff values your loyalty. He relies on you for so much." "Yes, ma'am," Garrett mumbled, avoiding her eyes. "It must be difficult, though," she continued, her voice filled with a carefully crafted sympathy. "Enforcing a law that sometimes feels harsher than it needs to be." She let the words hang in the air, a direct reference to the shooting. Garrett flinched. "The sheriff believes in order, ma'am. That's all." "I know," Lorena said, "but I've seen the look in your eyes, Deputy. You believe in justice. There is a difference." She had planted a seed. She knew she couldn't push him further, not yet. But she had forced him to acknowledge the dissonance between his duty and his conscience. Meanwhile, she knew she had to get a message to Cale. It was her most desperate gambit. She wrote a letter, not with words, but with symbols. She drew a crude map of the Bishop Ranch, marking the well. Next to it, she drew a symbol for silver and the initials GC. Then she drew a picture of a cage with a bird inside. It was a warning and a plea. Getting the letter out was the problem. She couldn't trust anyone. Finally, she remembered the young son of the livery owner, a boy named Tim, who often ran errands. She paid him a shiny silver dollar, one of her own, not Cole's, and gave him careful instructions. "Ride to the edge of the Red Canyons to the lone mesa that looks like a hawk's head," she told him. "Leave this pouch under the flat stone at its base. Tell no one. This is our secret." The boy, wide-eyed at the size of the coin, nodded solemnly. Days turned into a week, then 2. Lorena heard nothing. The silence was agonizing. Cole's confidence grew with her every obedient gesture. He began leaving her room unlocked at night, a sign that he believed her spirit was finally broken. It was the gravest mistake of his life. The breaking point came unexpectedly. A new prospector, a stubborn old man named Patterson, found a small silver deposit on his own claim land that wasn't part of Cole's holdings. He refused to sell out to Coronado Ventures. 2 days later, Patterson was found dead at the bottom of a ravine. The official ruling delivered by Sheriff Cole was an accident. That evening, Deputy Garrett came to the house. Lorena, clearing the dinner table, overheard his raised voice from behind the closed office door. "It wasn't no accident, Gideon. He was shot. I saw the hole in his coat." "The report will say it was an accident." Cole's voice was ice. "The man was a drunk and a fool. He slipped. But that ain't the truth. The truth is what I say it is. Are you questioning me, Wade?" The menace in Cole's voice was palpable. "You have a sick wife, a steady wage. Don't throw it all away on behalf of a dead man." There was a long silence. Then the sound of the office door opening. Garrett stormed out, his face pale and sick. He saw Lorena standing there, and for a moment his carefully constructed walls crumbled. She saw the shame, the fear, and the self-loathing in his eyes. He knew he had just become complicit in a murder. He brushed past her and out of the house. Lorena knew the time for whispering was over. The time for screaming had begun. That night she crept into Cole's office. He was so confident now he no longer bothered to lock the drawer with the CV Holdings file. She took the partnership agreement. It was the one piece of irrefutable proof. She didn't know how she would use it, only that she had to have it. As she slipped it into the folds of her dress, a sound from outside made her freeze. A low, mournful bird call, one she hadn't heard since her last night of freedom. It was repeated 3 times. It was a signal. Kyle had received her message, and he was coming. The night air was electric with unspoken tension. Kale's signal was not just a promise of rescue, it was a harbinger of the storm that was about to break over redemption. Lorena clutched the stolen document, her mind racing. A frontal assault by Kale and his warriors would be a bloodbath for both sides. It would play directly into Cole's hands, painting the Apache as savages and justifying any atrocity he chose to commit in response. She had to be smarter. She had to dismantle his power from within before the first arrow flew. Her target was Wade Garrett. She found him where she knew he would be drowning his conscience at the bottom of a whiskey bottle in Martha O'Malley's saloon. The place was mostly empty, the late hour having driven the patrons to their beds. Martha stood behind the bar, polishing a glass, her presence a silent, steady anchor. Lorena walked directly to Garrett's table and sat down. He looked up, his eyes bleary and unfocused. "Mrs. Cole," he slurred, "shouldn't be here. Neither should you, Deputy." She said, her voice sharp and clear. "You should be arresting a murderer. Instead, you're drinking with him." The accusation hit him harder than the whiskey. He straightened up, his focus sharpening. "You don't know what you're talking about," he growled. "I know that an old man named Patterson was killed because he wouldn't sell his claim to Coronado Ventures," she said, leaning forward. "And I know you saw the bullet hole. I also know who owns Coronado Ventures." She slid the partnership agreement across the table. Garrett stared at it, his face losing all color. He traced the 3 names with a trembling finger: Abernathy Pierce and Gideon Cole. The lie he had been telling himself, that he was just a lawman following orders, crumbled into dust. He was the paid enforcer for a conspiracy of thieves and murderers. "What do you want?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "What your conscience has been screaming for," Lorena answered. "Justice, not Cole's version. The real kind." Her eyes flickered towards Martha, who gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Martha has already spoken to some of the miners. They're being cheated, and they know it. They're scared of Cole, but they're more scared of starving. They just need someone to lead them. Someone with a badge." Before Garrett could answer, the night erupted. Not with the war cries and gunshots of an attack, but with fire. A brilliant orange glow blossomed at the far end of town, the assay office, where the ore from the Coronado mines was weighed and valued, was engulfed in flames. It was a diversion. Kyle was a brilliant strategist. He wasn't attacking the town. He was attacking Cole's source of wealth. Instantly the town burst into chaos. Men shouted, the fire bell began to clang, and Gideon Cole burst from his house, pistol in hand, his face a mask of fury. He saw the flames and bellowed for Garrett. This was the moment. Lorena looked at the deputy, her gaze intense. "Choose Wade. Right now. Do you ride to protect his ledger books, or do you stand for the people he's been bleeding dry?" Garrett looked at the paper, then at Lorena's unflinching face, and finally at the badge pinned to his chest. A lifetime of suppressed decency rose to the surface. He stood up no longer a drunk, but a lawman who had finally found his law. As Cole organized a futile bucket brigade, Garrett walked calmly to the center of the street. "That's enough," he yelled, his voice carrying over the din. "There's a bigger fire you all need to worry about. You're all being robbed." He held up the partnership agreement. Sheriff Cole, banker Abernathy, and the cattleman Pierce own Coronado Ventures. They're the ones getting rich off the silver, while they pay you in scrip you can't spend anywhere else. Old man Patterson found out, and they had him killed. A stunned silence fell over the crowd, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Abernathy, who had come running from his house, turned ghost white. Cole spun around his face, contorted with disbelief and rage. He saw Lorena standing on the saloon porch, and in an instant he understood everything. The demure wife, the quiet rides, the feigned obedience, it had all been an act. "You!" he roared, his voice raw with betrayal. He raised his pistol, not at Garrett, but at Lorena. He never fired. An arrow silent and swift as a thought sprouted from his gun shoulder. He screamed in pain and surprise, his pistol clattering to the dust. From the rooftops and dark alleys, a dozen Apache warriors emerged, led by Cale. They were not there for a massacre. They were there to bear witness and to ensure the scales of justice were balanced. Cole, clutching his arm, stared at Cale with pure hatred. "I'll see you all hanged. Your reign is over." "Cole," Garrett said, his own gun, now drawn and steady. "You're under arrest for the murder of James Patterson." The miners, their fear finally eclipsed by their anger, surged forward. They surrounded Abernathy, their faces grim. The conspiracy had been shattered, not by a gunfight, but by the truth. The final confrontation was between Cole, Lorena, and Cale in the middle of the street. "You think you've won?" Cole snarled at Lorena, blood dripping from his fingers. "You've thrown your lot in with him. A savage, I offered you a civilized world. You offered me a prettier cage." Lorena shot back, her voice ringing with strength. "He offered me the sky." Kyle stepped forward, his presence commanding. He spoke not to Cole, but to the townspeople. "We do not want your town. We want our land. We want the sacred ground you have desecrated to be returned. We want the thieves who murdered for silver to be punished by your law." His appeal was to their honor, not their fear. Cornered, exposed, and abandoned by his own people, Gideon Cole made one last desperate move. He lunged for his fallen gun, but Wade Garrett was faster. A single shot echoed through the night, clean and final. The Iron Sheriff of Redemption fell into the dust he had so long commanded. In the quiet aftermath, as the flames from the assay office died down to embers, a new order began to settle over the town. Garrett, with the backing of the miners and a weary town council, took charge. The truth of Coronado Ventures came out, and the partnership's assets were seized. Lorena stood with Cale as the sun began to rise, washing the smoke-filled sky with pale pink and gold. Her father's ranch was safe, its future secured not by a loveless marriage, but by her own courage. "What now?" she asked, looking at Cale. Their worlds were still impossibly different. He took her hand, his touch as warm and real as the coming dawn. "Now," he said, his dark eyes holding the promise of 1,000 sunrises. "We build a bridge instead of a fence. Their path would not be easy, but for the first time, it would be their own chosen in courage, and forged in the fire of a love that refused to be extinguished." And so the story of Lorena Bishop Gideon Cole and the Apache Heir Cale comes to a close. It's a testament to the fact that even in the most lawless of times, true strength isn't found in the power to control others, but in the courage to fight for your own heart. Lorena's journey from a pawn in a ruthless man's game to the architect of her own freedom, reminds us that cages can be broken, tyrants can be toppled, and love can bridge the most impossible divides. What do you think was Lorena's gamble worth the risk? Could you have been as brave? The Wild West was filled with countless untold stories, like this one, tales of quiet heroism and desperate love, hidden in the dust and shadows of history. If Lorena's fight for freedom and her heart's true choice moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who loves an epic tale, and subscribe for more stories from the untamed heart of the American West. Thank you for listening.